In 1967, New Orleans woke up to a rumor that didn't stay a rumor for very long. By mid-morning, it was on the radio. By the afternoon, it was in the papers. David William Ferrie was dead. The man with the painted-on eyebrows, the cheap, glued-on hair, the voice that could shift from preacher to lunatic in the same sentence. The former Eastern Airlines pilot who trained boys in the Civil Air Patrol and then lost his wings, his uniform, his job, and eventually his footing. The man whose name never stayed buried, not after Dallas, not after Marcello, not after the Bay of Pigs, and not after Garrison. For years, Ferrie existed on the margins of every story that mattered. Pilot, instructor, anti-Castro fanatic, errand runner, legal researcher, go-between. He studied theology, tried to become a priest, quit, studied philosophy, got a degree, and then mailed off for a fake doctorate in psychology. He called himself Dr. Ferrie. Some believed him. He built a so-called laboratory over his garage, where he claimed to have lost his hair in radiation and chemical experiments. Others just called it madness. He was born in Cleveland in 1918, son of a police captain and attorney, raised in parochial schools, described by people who knew him best as a paradox. Intelligent, almost brilliant, but unstable. Aggressive, obnoxious. A man who resented authority but craved influence. He found that influence in young men, the Civil Air Patrol cadets, teaching them aviation, science, discipline, and exerting a control that eventually brought angry parents, police, and criminal charges to his door. By the early 1950s, he had found his path in aviation. Eastern Airlines hired him in 1951, despite red flags in his application. He flew well, very well. Even those who hated him admitted that. He promoted Eastern, spoke at schools, built up aviation programs. But his record caught up with him. Lies on his application, moral charges, his tendency to present himself as a psychologist, accusations involving teenage boys. By 1961, after years of investigations and hearings, Eastern Airlines fired him for good. That didn't end his life in the air, it just pushed him underground. By 1959, Ferrie had shifted his obsession to anti-Castro operations. He aligned himself with Sergio Arcacha Smith and the Cuban Revolutionary Council in New Orleans. He claimed to build miniature submarines to attack Havana Harbor. He gathered weapons. He taught Cubans how to fly. He ran with Gordon Novel, Leighton Martins. He moved inside that strange New Orleans world where politics, intelligence, Cuban exiles, private detectives, and organized crime all shared the same cheap office buildings. That's how he came into Guy Bannister's orbit. Bannister, former FBI agent turned private investigator, was running operations out of 544 Camp Street, the same building tied to pro-Castro and anti-Castro activity, and later forever linked to Lee Harvey Oswald. Ferrie used Bannister as legal and investigative backing. Bannister used Ferrie's obsessive intelligence and connections. Ferrie analyzed autopsy reports for him, worked cases, traded research for legal defense. By 1961, Ferrie's personal life collapsed in courtrooms. He was charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor, arrested again for indecent behavior and crimes against nature with teenage boys. Several boys made statements describing his behavior. He signed into juvenile detention centers pretending to be a doctor. Eastern Airlines removed him from payroll. The FAA launched investigations. His name went into federal files. And still he didn't fall. He found protection and proximity elsewhere. Carlos Marcello. By 1961, Ferrie was circling Marcello's world. Organized crime, immigration fraud cases, private strategies, legal maneuvering. He sought help from G. Ray Gill, Sr., Marcello's own lawyer. He worked alongside Marcello associates, like Jacob Nastasi. According to Border Patrol reports, he may have even flown Marcello back into the United States from Guatemala in 1961, after Robert Kennedy had him deported. It wasn't confirmed. But in Marcello's world, confirmed wasn't required. Loyalty was. Ferrie had money when he shouldn't have. According to Carlos Quiroga, he walked around with $100 bills after losing his airline job. He allegedly lent money to Arcacha Smith. The theory among investigators was simple. He wasn't just volunteering anymore. He may have been acting as Marcello's financial conduit to the anti-Castro movement. By the fall of 1963, Ferrie was fully embedded in Marcello's legal battle. Marcello was on trial for immigration fraud. Ferrie worked his defense investigation. He traveled to Guatemala on Marcello business in October. He stayed at Churchill Farms, Marcello's estate, weekends in November. He purchased a .38 caliber revolver the day after the trial began. November 22nd, 1963. Kennedy was dead in Dealey Plaza. That same day, Bannister pistol-whipped Jack Martin in a fight over long-distance phone calls. Martin went to police but wouldn't press charges. Instead, within 48 hours, he had the New Orleans Police Department hunting for one name: David Ferrie. Martin claimed Ferrie had known Oswald, had trained him in the Civil Air Patrol, had been his getaway pilot, had been in Texas on the day of the assassination. Ferrie, meanwhile, said he'd been in New Orleans celebrating Marcello's courtroom victory at the Royal Orleans Hotel. Marcello had just been acquitted by a jury many thought he had quietly bent. It was supposed to be a victory night. Instead, Ferrie left town. According to his own account, he drove to Houston with Melvin Coffey and Alvin Beauboeuf, checked into the Ala Motel early December 23rd, went figure skating, drove on to Galveston, and stayed at the Driftwood Motel. The records didn't line up clean. Check-in and check-out times contradicted each other. The registration card had been altered. Motel employees gave conflicting accounts. Phone records showed calls made from the Houston Motel to New Orleans radio stations, WSHO and WDSU, and a collect call to the Town and Country Motel, Marcello's headquarters. On November 25th, Ferrie returned to New Orleans and voluntarily walked into the district attorney's office with G. Ray Gill. He was questioned by the New Orleans Police, U.S. Secret Service, and FBI. He denied ever knowing Oswald, denied being in Texas, denied any involvement. His alibi was supported by Marcello, Marcello's lawyer, the lawyer's secretary, and an FBI agent named Regis Kennedy. The FBI investigated. They checked his aircraft, a Stinson Voyager. Confirmed it wasn't operational on November 22nd. They examined his travel story. I interviewed his associates, verified parts of his account. Jack Martin later admitted he had no concrete evidence for his accusations. The FBI and Warren Commission concluded the Oswald-Ferrie relationship was unfounded. They also never closed the file on him. Because Ferrie didn't just sit quietly after Dallas. He launched his own investigation. He visited Oswald's former landlady, asking about his library card. He spoke to neighbors. He contacted former Civil Air Patrol cadets, searched for old photographs, trying to find proof that Oswald had been in his squadron. He chased his own ghost, or tried to erase it. Then came 1966. Carlos Marcello was picked up in New York, photographed with the major mafia bosses of the era. His face flashed across the national press. When he returned to New Orleans, an FBI agent confronted him at the airport. Marcello didn't smile. He threw 2 punches, 2 clean shots to the Bureau's face. It became legend overnight. At the same time, a syndicated columnist named Ed Reed was finishing his book, The Grim Reapers. In one chapter, Reed wrote that Marcello had threatened to take revenge on President Kennedy using a nut, a nobody, for what Bobby Kennedy had done to him. Word reached Washington, then Hoover, then Marcello. Hoover tried to bury it. Marcello unleashed lawyers. The story made it into print anyway. For the first time, Marcello couldn't control the narrative. That's when Jim Garrison stepped out of the background. In late 1966, Garrison quietly reopened the Kennedy assassination probe. By early 1967, it was public. He needed intermediaries, connectors, background men. And one name kept resurfacing. The same name that never disappeared from the margins. David Ferrie. Then Ferrie died. Official cause, natural causes. A burst blood vessel in the brain. A stressed man pushed too far. Unofficially, nobody in New Orleans believed it, especially not when another man tied to Ferrie died the same day. 2 bodies. Same circle. Same timing. Ferrie had spent his life living between worlds, aviation and crime, intelligence and conspiracy, church and obsession, legitimacy and fraud. He had studied hypnosis, psychology, politics, theology. He had tried to become a priest, a doctor, a captain, a power behind men who moved real power. The House Select Committee on Assassinations later concluded that his activities before 1963 warranted serious investigation. They found parallels between Ferrie and Oswald in temperament, instability, political obsession, and overlapping geography. They reviewed his full life, FBI files, FAA investigations, Eastern Airlines records, New Orleans police reports, INS files, Garrison's investigation, surveillance reports, and witness interviews. They couldn't prove he conspired to kill a president, but they couldn't clear the shadows he lived in either, because Ferrie had always been that kind of figure. Not the man in front of history, but the one standing just behind it, whispering, calculating, drifting between truth and illusion. And when he finally disappeared in 1967, he didn't leave answers. He took them with him.